This story was submitted by Soho. I live in Mexico, and this took place earlier this year in July. That night, I had decided to go out with some friends. Most of them decided not to go because they had some other plans, so only my friend Daniel and I went to Nuevo Sur, the place we were supposed to meet, a mall. We only hung out for about 2 hours because he also had other plans. When it was time for him to leave, I decided to call my father to come pick me up. He said, "I'll be there in about 30 minutes. I had to wait pretty long, so I decided to buy some food. After I finished my food, my father called me saying that he would be there in a moment, so I waited for him out front of the mall. This is where things start to get creepy. I was listening to music near the bus stop outside, when all of a sudden, 3 dudes in a brown car stopped to ask me for some directions. The directions they asked for were nowhere near where we were. I told them that I didn't know how to get there, and that it was far away from where we were. Suddenly, they told me that they were from the Cartel de Golfo, and it scared the hell out of me, as I thought they were going to kidnap me. Luckily, they just told me that they only wanted to inspect if I was there selling drugs, which I wasn't because I'm a clean guy. I was scared and I wanted to yell or something, and they must have been able to see that because they told me not to scream or they would shoot me. They then proceeded to ask for my phone, which I gave them. Thankfully, they only wanted to see if I was using Nextel, a Mexican phone company. I think that they wanted to know that because it would be an indication that I was from another cartel selling drugs. Luckily, I only used Telcel, so they gave my phone back and asked me if I carried money. I had just spent all my money on the food I bought, so I showed them my wallet and told them I didn't have any money. They didn't say another word, they just left, and I ran the hell out of there. I wish I had told the security guard near there, but I hadn't. I also wish I had seen the car plate, but because of me being so scared, I hadn't taken the time to look before running. My father showed up about 4 minutes after the incident. I didn't tell him what happened, as I didn't want to scare him. I wish I would have been able to do something to those 3 dudes, but I couldn't. At least I'm lucky they didn't kidnap me. This story was submitted by OBITO. This happened literally the night before I typed this. I live in a decent-sized college town in the eastern United States. I am a retired member of the United States Air Force Special Forces, and am currently preparing myself for a jump from my now boring life to the Marine Corps. I'm not the type of person to be scared easily. Few events in my life have really made me sweat and tremble with pure fear. But this turned out to be one such event. For the past year, I've been living with my mother, her boyfriend, and my little sister. Circumstances caused my cash to dwindle, and so I lost my perfectly suited apartment. Only a few weeks ago, we moved from our old house into my mother's boyfriend's house. We still had some stuff to get out of our old dwelling, but most everything we need is here now, cluttering up the basement to hell. Only days ago we finally got the internet and cable installed. Truly my saving grace, as I do a lot of writing in my spare time and could finally upload all of my works. Additionally, my pals had grown to miss me on Xbox Live and had constantly been blowing up my phone asking, "When are you getting back on, bro?" I had decided that this night would be the night. It was just about midnight, everyone was asleep, the dog was in his cage and passed out, and I had the living room to myself. Upon making my preparations for what I felt would be a fun-filled night a long time coming, I had a sudden revelation that made me groan in disdain. One crucial thing was missing: the microphone. It's rather difficult to communicate real-time strategy to teammates when you can't talk with them. This meant that I would have to walk all the way back to our old house, at midnight, in the pouring rain, in late October, in a $7 pair of Walmart sneakers to retrieve it. I sent a message to the crew saying I would be late to the party, got my heavy jacket, my headphones, and headed out. It wasn't pouring as hard as I thought it would be, but the raindrops were thick and fat, and the rain was coming in heavy enough to be unpleasant. With my hood up, the coat did its job. The walk wasn't far. I just had other things I'd rather be doing than taking a midnight stroll in a drizzle. Upon leaving the house, I had to walk straight down the dimly lit road, houses in close proximity on both sides, to turn right and walk about 50 yards down the hill to the main road that leads to the center of town, coming right off of the main highway. At this time of night, cars out here on the outskirts of town are rare, the only ones being those coming off of the highway, and even then, they are few at this hour. From there, it's a march of about 100 yards or so to make a right turn at a stoplight, and the house is just a bit over a quarter mile up the hill. By this point, my trashy shoes are soaked through with water, and when I finally made it to the other house, I was sprinting the last leg just to get it over with. I stuffed my keys into the lock, got in, flicked on the lights, and dashed to the attic. The microphone was right where I remembered, inside a plastic bag just to the right of the entry of my old room. I grabbed it, stuffed it in my left pocket, and made tracks out of the house. With the door locked, I picked up my pace and took long strides towards home. I'd gone about 3 blocks down the road from the house when the abnormal feeling of dread started to creep up on me. That unsettling feeling you get when you're being stalked. I'm walking down rather dark neighborhood sidewalks, on a route I'd walked thousands of times in my life, past midnight, with music in my ears. This may make me seem to be asking for trouble, but I do not live in a place where crime is an issue. The worst we typically get here are stupid drunk college kids breaking parking meters, and the occasional traffic accident. Even so, I have been jumped before, and though the altercation did not end well for said moron by any means, the persistent ache in my lower back for days after taught me a good lesson. Now my guard is always up. My music is at a low volume anytime I walk anywhere at night. I'm always checking potential hiding areas from my 9 to my 12, and occasionally turning to check my rear. I did not intend to have a repeat incident. But in the end, you can't always look behind yourself all the time. As I spun to check my rear again, I was shocked to see a white SUV was pulling up beside me slowly. It took me a moment to comprehend that the reason I hadn't seen it coming, even when it was facing directly ahead, was because the headlights were off. My feeling of uneasiness increased greatly. I reached into my pocket and shut off my music, yanking my headphones out, my eyes never straying from the vehicle. It looked like a Ford Explorer, relatively new, and no identifying marks that I could see. The driver's side window rolled down and the interior light came on, which revealed to me 2 individuals in the car. The driver I got a good look at, a man with a rounded face, doubled chin, bald, wearing a dark shirt with a white undershirt. He had a very calm, almost bored expression when he first looked at me. The other guy in the passenger side I didn't get a good look at, but I could see half of his face, and he was looking at me a bit harder, sort of scrutinizing. He was a bit plump too, and I saw chin stubble. I then noticed what looked like a blue police light on the dashboard, and seeing this, I looked at the back doors and saw bars on the windows. It immediately hit me. It's an undercover police car. It made sense why they pulled over to talk to me. Guy walking fast, looking all around, at midnight, in a rainstorm. Looks pretty suspicious. They might have thought I was some paranoid drug dealer or something. But my trepidation only strengthened. Why were the headlights off then? "Hey man, how you doing?" the driver asked me. I pulled my hood back and smiled, not betraying the fact that my toes were jumping around inside of my shoes. "I'm a little wet, but just fine," I responded, making sure to keep my tone relaxed. I could not shake the feeling that this was trouble, but I wasn't fully unprepared. Inside of my pocket was my personal blade, my SOG spirit knife. It's a wonderful knife, but this time it didn't make me feel safer. The driver asked me what I was doing walking around at this time of night, and I explained as briefly as I could that I had moved and left my microphone at my old house and went back to get it. He affirmed that the two of them were state police and that they had seen me acting suspiciously. I told them that I had been jumped at night before and was just keeping a watchful eye. He asked me how far I had to go, and I said something like a mile. "You want a lift?" he asked. This really set off a bell in my head. I've never heard of any real-world situation in which any policeman anywhere had offered an unknown a ride anywhere but the jailhouse. I had a good sense coming from somewhere that these guys were not cops, and this whole situation had me sweating in my heavy coat. I made it appear as if I were considering the offer for a moment, before asking, "Can I see your police IDs?" If there is one thing law enforcement is required to do when on patrol, it is identify themselves when making a stop. If they refuse, they have no authority to detain you or perform any force against you, unless they are completely undercover on a case. Throughout all of this, the second man did nothing but stare me down. Essentially, the driver looked at his companion in the other seat and asked if he remembered to bring his ID. He then told me that both of them had forgotten their IDs at home. "Brain fart," he said. That was it. Fight or flight kicked in, but in a way I'd never felt before. From the instant he said they had no ID, I got a sense that these two men meant a danger to me that wasn't to be dealt with, but to aggress from as quickly as possible. My brain was screaming at me to get out of there as quickly as I could. Still trying to seem at ease, I spouted, "Then unless you guys are going to get in the back and let me drive, I'll have to decline." I put my hood back up and started walking my route again, hoping they would get the hint that I wasn't falling for it. Instead, he pulled up next to me keeping pace, asking if I was sure. I didn't want to provoke them, but I was just so on edge that my next scathing remark just slipped out. I told them that it was obvious they weren't what they said they were, and that if they wanted to try me, all they had to do was step out, and I had no problem introducing them to the pavement. "Alrighty then," he resigned, and they slowly drove down ahead of me, stopping at the stoplight and then continuing on. I got the license plate number and was working on committing it to memory before I saw them grind to a halt at the next stop sign. The driver had jammed the brakes hard, flicked on the headlights, finally, and aggressively backed up the SUV in preparation to turn around. My blood went from boiling to ice in a blink. I froze for an instant, but once I saw the lights turn in my direction, I bolted to my left in a dead sprint, ducking behind the nearest house. I have been through some monumentally stressful training that broke lesser men, but somehow this had my heart hammering out of me. I had not experienced such a blind fear since I had been much younger. All I could hear was my pulse pounding in my ears, until the vehicle screamed by and went down the street. Seconds later, I heard it stop, and one of the doors open. That was all I needed to take off. I dashed through the backyards, jumped a fence, and crept into a small patch of woods just outside the freeway. I waited in there for close to a half hour, trying to come to terms with what had just happened. I turned on my MP3 player and checked the time, which it revealed to be after 1 a.m. I then hustled back to the house as quickly as I could manage, but by this point my feet were waterlogged and blistering badly. By this time I may have been just paranoid, but as I was coming down the road and nearly at my house, I checked my rear to see headlights peeking over the crest and heard the engine roar. I broke an Olympic record for the last 30 feet. I got in, locked every door, and shut off all the lights. I stayed up all night in my room with the door locked, knife sheathed in my hand. I know that being a self-proclaimed badass, I shouldn't have been such a pansy about all of this. I'm not sure how to explain it accurately, but I think if they had just outright pointed guns at me, I would have been less freaked out. Something about the look in their eyes and the tone in their voice, plus some other sensation I just cannot identify, told me that they had means to grab me and the intention to do things to me that you wouldn't even do to an animal bred for slaughter. I called the police shortly after dawn, told them what had happened, and gave them the license plate digits, and they assured me that they were on it, and that was it. I'm hoping to sleep more tonight. I might seem pathetic for being so frightened by something like this, but my first high-altitude jump had me less shaky. My trying to explain it doesn't do it justice. If you had been there, maybe you'd understand. If you enjoyed this video, you know what to do. I really appreciate everyone sending in their stories, and if you would like a chance to have your story featured, make sure you check out the description to see how to submit them. I'll catch you guys tomorrow for another video, and just remember, it's always scarier if it's true.